Great. Well, thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here. And as Mike said, thank you to all of you that are in the room. I know there's a number of us that we've partnered with you guys in various shape and form, whether it's around research studies or it's around partnering, actually getting this on farm for producers. So just want to do a quick shout out because that's really what it's ultimately about, and talk to you a little bit what from an Elanco perspective, want to leave you with a few key messages. One, it's real and it's here, right? So you heard from Paul earlier. He stole a little bit of my thunder around how much carbon credits we've actually monetized. So he mentioned the $5 million that's already been paid and another $10 million that's coming here in the next coming months. And that's really been around Rumensin and Bovaer and some feed additives. So we're super excited for our dairy producers here in California and in other states that it's real, it's tangible, it's progress on the farm, and as Michael mentioned, it's another solution that they have in their toolbox that we're actually creating the right incentives for them to implement it on farm. Two, and when I say it's happening, I want to say it's also happening more broadly, right? It's in beef and dairy. I'll share with you a few examples of not what's just happening in dairy, but also what's happening in beef. It's happening in multiple interventions, so not just one product. It's not just about Bovaer. There's multiple interventions that producers have solutions to today. And then there's a number of food companies up here, but what I would say is there's growing demand from the food companies and a great partnership that we see happening with the food companies wanting to get back to the producers and creating those right incentives. So I'll show you a little bit of Elanco's approach and how we're really trying to make sure we're bringing that whole value chain together. But if I leave you with nothing else, it's here. We're ready to go. And I think there's an opportunity as we think about not just what's happening with Bovaer, but a lot of the additional things that are coming to marketplace and how do we make sure that we're providing the right incentives, we're having the right talking conversations together, and we're focusing on progress and not perfection. That's my really big thing when we think about it is we have to think about how we scale to an industry, not how we just think about one unique farm. And that really takes progress over perfection as we continue to move that forward. So I'll start a little bit with Elanco. Oops, going backwards. I'm guessing many people already did this. So talking from a supply chain standpoint, you guys all know this as we think about where does Elanco fit, what are we traditionally doing, right? So Elanco is traditionally focused on animal nutrition, pharmaceutical type products, whether that's vaccines, antibiotics. So when we think about what's happening in the ways that you can reduce methane, this is a very simplified version, right? You can do it in the crops, you can do it in the animal, you can do it with the manure, or you can do it on the operation. From an Elanco perspective, we're really focused on in the animal, saying what is it we can do from a nutrition standpoint, from a methane mitigation technology. There's other efficiencies that we believe that can be on play, whether that's just the general health and welfare of the animal, to different things that you can do with genetics. And so what I'll share with you is really what our perspective is and how we're thinking about in the animal, knowing that actually a lot of these can also be applied outside of just what's happening in the animal. Our guiding principles, first and foremost, whenever we think about what we're gonna do here, is you have to lead with the science. If the science is not there, it's not something that is good for the producer, the industry, Elanco, and our consumers as we think about having confidence in their food supply. So at the end of the day, we must have credible science and moving that forward. So we think about it in three pegs. How do you make sure it's credible from a science standpoint, base science, but then also how do you make sure you have the third-party verification and validation, whether you're in your methodologies, your science, the peer-reviewed, all of those pieces are absolutely critical. How do you make it scalable? So again, it's really easy to focus on the really big feed yards or the really big dairies, but we like to think about it, how can we make sure that we're actually creating tools and resources that allow us to get, maybe not to every producer, but allow us to get to 30%, 50% of the marketplace with a solution or tool so that we can actually have a measurable impact in the industry. And then the other part is it must create value, right? So it has to create value for the producers, it has to create value for the food companies, for the entire value chain. Now that value will look different. For a producer, it's typically cash, right? And how do they actually get incentives from a financial standpoint on their farm? But from a food company, it can be around what's happening from their Scope 3 commitments, goodwill, investors, financing options, you name it, you see it across the whole scope of what are those opportunities. So we're really focused on those three areas. How do you make it credible, scalable, valuable, and ultimately help the value chain from producers to the food companies achieve their reduction goals. And we also see this as an opportunity for us to continue to have the right to operate. No one wants to see this regulated, particularly here in the US, into a mandate, but we do know it's really critically important as we move forward, this is our future right to operate on making sure that we have these solutions available longer term. So from an Elanco perspective, we really could look at it and said, okay, what does this mean? How do we do this? For us, it's not just about bringing a product like Bovaer to the marketplace. It's really around bringing in an ecosystem that allows our producers to create additional value on the farm and allows our food companies to achieve their goals. And so we look at it from 4 pillars. 1, what is the innovation or the intervention? 2, what is the analytics? How do we make sure that on farm we're helping actually get the data to get a credible reduction and understand what's happening there? 3, how do we help create value? So you heard from Paul at Athian earlier, we partner with organizations like that and others to make sure that there's these opportunities for producers to get connected into the food companies and create value. And then the 4th one is really around advocacy. That's actually where I spend a lot of my time, is working with policymakers and how do we get innovations here more quickly, working from a public relations standpoint, saying how do we talk about what we're doing, how do we make sure that we keep products like Bovaer or other technologies available for our customers, and think about it through the lens of the consumer, and then really how do we continue to tell the ag story. So when you look at this, this is really the 4, what we call it our 4-pillar strategy that we do in Elanco. We've done it in dairy, and I'll walk you through a couple of dairy examples. We've done it actually in beef. We're doing a couple of pilots now, and we'll be announcing those here in the next quarter or so on something more broadly scaled in beef, and they're looking to do it to other species as well as other geographies. Now, I won't go through this in like super detail, but you guys are all well-versed in this. But really what we've done from an Elanco perspective is taken not just the traditional value stream of what you see on the left-hand side of that, of meat, milk, or eggs, right? Like that's what producers do day in and day out, is creating a new value stream. We believe it's actually really important to separate the carbon from the cattle and have a separate carbon reduction that producers are actually getting paid at versus having it as an attribute associated with the meat, milk, or eggs. And so that's where we've worked with other organizations and the food companies to make sure we're creating those incentives. So the way that this works, right, this is an in-setting model, is a producer would purchase Bovaer or Rumensin. So if you feed Bovaer, it's about 1.2 metric tons of reduction per lactating dairy cow per year. If you feed Rumensin, it's about a 0.5 metric ton of reduction per year. And so a producer would buy the product, just like they would any other feed source, feed it. And then we have our tool UpLook, which is a carbon footprint calculator that we work with farmers to make sure they're inputting their data and use that as a MMRV tool to feed into an Athian platform or other carbon marketplace, whatever they would need to actually say what is the carbon reduction that's happening on farm. And then those marketplaces, or even from an Elanco perspective, we partner a lot in connecting with those food companies and having conversations around what is Bovaer, what is Rumensin, what are the reductions, and working with them on mapping out their milk sheds and understanding where the producers are and really aligning that to create the incentive. So from our perspective, where we focused is you can't just bring the intervention and say, have at it. You have to bring the intervention. You have to have the MMRV tool on farm that's easy for producers to use. You have to facilitate that transaction. So whether that's Athian or some other carbon marketplace or direct with a food company, there's some of those that do it directly with producers, helping facilitate that transaction and making that come full circle. So this is an example of what we've done in dairy. We're doing something very similar in beef. We've launched a product called Experior, which has an ammonia reduction claim. And using our tool UpLook on the feed yards there, we're able to measure reductions that happen on the entire feed yard. And we'll be announcing a bigger partnership here in the coming weeks around what that looks like. But it is real on the feed yard. And then we have 3 different pilots happening with Rumensin on the beef cows, looking into the extensive market and saying, okay, how do we replicate this in extensive? That certainly has some of its own challenges, just like as you mentioned, my dad is a beef farmer who doesn't keep records. So record keeping is getting interesting when we think about from a beef perspective, but we're certainly looking at what are the options and focusing on that progress over perfection on the beef side of the business. So these are some real tangible examples. It's happening, right? We've already monetized for dairy producers on Rumensin and Bovaer, working on some of the other ones in beef, and it's here to stay. So we're excited to continue to expand this and partner with the organizations. And what I would say here is there's a lot of hands in here, and we're all talking. I'd say, I know Paul and Kendra are here from Athian. Our teams talk multiple times a day, trying to make sure that we're bringing this together. It's something new. And so I think leaning into those conversations, understanding perspectives as we continue to implement and scale this is really important. We won't get it perfect the first time, but we can certainly make progress together as an industry and as partners trying to move it forward. Thank you.